Once upon a time, there was a young boy named Solomon, born into a kingdom forged by valor, steeped in promise, and blessed by divine favor. His father, King David, had united the nation of Israel and carved out a realm where God's presence was as palpable as the morning breeze across the hills of Jerusalem. But from the very start, Solomon's story was anything but ordinary, a tale filled with paradoxes, triumphs, and lessons that echo through the corridors of history. Even today, Solomon came into the world under the shadow of scandal. He was the son of David and Bathsheba, a union that had begun with sin but ended with God's unexpected grace. Though there were whispers around the palace, murmurs of betrayal and redemption, this child was destined for greatness. Even before his birth, God declared that Solomon would be a man of peace, a name that itself meant peace in Hebrew. It was a hope, a destiny, and a calling that would set the course for his entire life. But the road to the throne was never smooth. Solomon wasn't the firstborn. In fact, he wasn't even close. As the 10th son of David, he was far from the obvious heir to Israel's throne. His older half-brother, Adonijah, saw the crown as his own, and as their father lay frail on his deathbed, Adonijah gathered his allies, declaring himself king. It was a dangerous time, an uncertain moment that seemed poised to unravel everything David had built. The tension in the palace was palpable, with whispers echoing through the halls and many wondering who would emerge victorious in this power struggle. Yet God's plans often unfold in unexpected ways. Nathan the prophet and Bathsheba reminded David of his promise to crown Solomon, and in a decisive moment, David commanded Solomon to be anointed king. Picture it, a young Solomon, scarcely more than a boy, suddenly thrust into the role of a ruler, wearing a crown heavy with the hopes of an entire people. He sat on the throne of his father David, and his rule was firmly established. But not without challenges. The weight of the crown was immense, and the expectations placed upon his shoulders were daunting. David, knowing his end was near, gave Solomon a chilling list of final instructions. These were not merely practical pieces of advice. They were a baptism by fire. Deal with old enemies, reward the loyal friends, and above all, follow God's ways. It was a moment that tested Solomon's resolve, a trial that demanded he choose whether to hold fast to his father's faith or be overwhelmed by the shadowy struggles of power. The young king faced these challenges with a mixture of fear and determination, knowing that his father's legacy rested on his ability to lead wisely. Early in his reign, Solomon found himself at a crossroads. God appeared to him in a dream, offering him anything he desired: wealth, long life, victory over his enemies. The choice was his. Imagine that, the opportunity to ask for anything, to shape the future with a single request. Yet Solomon, with a heart still unclouded by ambition, chose wisdom. He asked for a discerning heart, the ability to distinguish right from wrong, to govern his people justly. This request revealed the depth of Solomon's character. He sought not personal gain, but the ability to serve his people well. God was pleased, more than pleased in fact. Not only did he grant Solomon unmatched wisdom, but also riches, honor, and a promise of long life if Solomon remained faithful. It was a divine blessing that would shape his reign and make his name synonymous with wisdom for centuries to come. Solomon's wisdom became a beacon, drawing people from near and far to witness the remarkable insight of this young king. His reputation grew, and soon the entire world knew of Solomon's extraordinary gift. One of the earliest displays of Solomon's wisdom came in a dramatic court case that left the nation in awe. Two women stood before the young king, each claiming to be the mother of a single infant. There were no witnesses, no evidence, only desperation and a baby whose future hung in the balance. Solomon, in a moment of insight that revealed the true power of discernment, suggested dividing the child in two, giving each woman half. It was a shocking proposal, yet it revealed the real mother, who begged to give up her claim rather than see her child harmed. The nation marveled at Solomon's ability to see beyond the surface, to understand the very nature of love and sacrifice. This judgment not only solidified his reputation as a wise ruler, but also endeared him to the people, who saw in him a king who genuinely cared for justice and the well-being of his subjects. Solomon's wisdom wasn't just confined to courtrooms and disputes. He was a scholar, a poet, and a lover of knowledge. He composed 3,000 proverbs, penned over 1,000 songs, and spoke with authority on subjects ranging from botany to the behavior of animals. His understanding of the natural world and human nature was unparalleled, and people from every corner of the known world came to hear him speak. His fame spread far and wide, reaching foreign courts and drawing in dignitaries like the Queen of Sheba, who traveled great distances to see if the rumors were true. She arrived with caravans laden with spices, gold, and precious stones, eager to test Solomon with hard questions. In the end, she was left breathless by his wisdom and his wealth, admitting that not even half of his greatness had been told. The Queen of Sheba's visit was more than just a diplomatic event. It was a testament to the far-reaching impact of Solomon's wisdom. She came prepared to challenge him, to see if his reputation held any truth. But she left in awe, having witnessed the depth of his understanding and the splendor of his court. The exchange between Solomon and the Queen of Sheba became legendary, a meeting of minds that highlighted the king's ability to transcend cultural and national boundaries through the power of knowledge and insight. Under Solomon's rule, Israel experienced an age of unprecedented prosperity. The land flowed with milk and honey, and peace settled over the kingdom. The Bible tells us that every man lived under his own vine and fig tree, and silver was as common as stones in Jerusalem. Solomon's administration was efficient. He divided the kingdom into 12 districts, each tasked with providing for the royal household for 1 month of the year, ensuring a steady flow of resources without overburdening the people. Trade flourished, with alliances like the one with Hiram of Tyre, bringing in valuable cedar wood and precious metals. Solomon's fleet sailed to distant lands, returning with exotic goods that filled the royal treasury. The bustling ports of Israel were filled with ships carrying treasures from far-off lands, gold, silver, ivory, and rare spices that added to the kingdom's wealth. Solomon's wealth was not merely a reflection of his success as a ruler. It was also a symbol of God's favor. The kingdom was a beacon of prosperity, attracting traders, artisans, and scholars from across the ancient world. The streets of Jerusalem were alive with activity, merchants selling their wares, officials overseeing the flow of goods, and visitors from distant lands marveling at the grandeur of the city. It was a time of cultural and intellectual flourishing, where the arts thrived and knowledge was celebrated. Solomon's court became a hub of learning, a place where ideas were exchanged and wisdom was valued above all. Yet it wasn't just wealth that Solomon sought to build. His greatest achievement was the construction of the temple in Jerusalem, a project that had been his father's dream. David had longed to build a house for the Lord, a place where God's presence could dwell among his people. Solomon took up this mantle, gathering the finest materials, cedar from Lebanon, gold, silver, and costly stones, and assembling a vast workforce to bring the vision to life. The temple was a marvel, its interior overlaid with gold, its halls filled with intricate carvings and precious ornaments. The Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant would rest, was constructed with meticulous care, reflecting the perfection and holiness of God. The construction of the temple was an immense undertaking. Solomon enlisted thousands of workers, 30,000 men from Israel, 70,000 carriers, and 80,000 stonecutters, to labor in the mountains, quarrying stones and preparing materials. The sound of hammers and chisels echoed across Jerusalem as the workers toiled day and night to complete the structure. The scale of the project was staggering, requiring not only manpower but also an unwavering commitment to the vision that David had passed down to his son. The temple was more than just a building. It was a symbol of Israel's devotion to God, a place where heaven and earth would meet. When the temple was completed, Solomon organized a grand dedication ceremony. The ark was brought into its new home, sacrifices were offered in abundance, and Solomon knelt before the altar, offering a prayer of dedication that resounded with humility and reverence. As he prayed, a cloud filled the temple, the glory of the Lord, so overwhelming that the priests could not continue their service. It was a moment that marked a new chapter in Israel's relationship with God, a tangible sign of his presence among his people. The dedication of the temple was a celebration like no other, with music, feasting, and worship that filled the hearts of the people with joy and awe. The temple stood as a testament to Solomon's devotion and the fulfillment of his father's dream. Its golden walls and sacred halls were a reminder of God's covenant with Israel, a place where sacrifices were made and prayers were lifted. But as magnificent as the temple was, it also posed a question: was God more pleased with grand structures or with humble, obedient hearts? The temple was a symbol, but the true measure of Israel's faith would be found not in its grandeur, but in the hearts of its people. But with great blessings come great responsibilities, and beneath the glittering surface of Solomon's reign, cracks began to form. As his wealth grew, so did his ambition. He built not only the temple but also a magnificent palace for himself, a structure that took 13 years to complete. He married many wives, 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, forming alliances with surrounding nations, including Egypt. These marriages, while politically advantageous, brought foreign customs and foreign gods into the heart of Israel. The very man who had built a temple for the one true God now allowed high places to be erected for the gods of his foreign wives. Solomon, once so devoted, began to drift. Perhaps it was gradual, a small compromise here, a concession there, but soon the king who had prayed for wisdom found himself ensnared by the allure of power and influence. His heart was not fully devoted to the Lord, and the consequences of his actions began to ripple through the kingdom. The opulence of his court, the grandeur of his palace, and the influence of his foreign wives all contributed to a slow but steady decline in his spiritual devotion. The once unified Israel, blessed beyond measure, was now poised on the edge of division. Enemies began to rise from within and without. Jeroboam, one of Solomon's officials, was told by a prophet that he would rule over 10 of the tribes of Israel after Solomon's death, a judgment against Solomon's unfaithfulness. The peace that had characterized the early years of his reign began to crumble, and discontent simmered among the people, who were weary of heavy taxation and forced labor. The burden that Solomon had placed upon his people, once tolerable in times of prosperity, now felt oppressive as the cracks in his leadership began to show. As Solomon grew older, the weight of his choices pressed heavily upon him. The glory of his early years was now marred by the reality of his spiritual decline. He who had been the wisest of all kings, who had received divine favor beyond measure, had allowed his heart to be led astray. And yet, even in his later writings, there is a sense of reflection, a recognition of the emptiness that comes from chasing after the wind. The book of Ecclesiastes, often attributed to Solomon, speaks of the vanity of earthly pursuits and the ultimate importance of fearing God and keeping his commandments. It is the voice of a man who had tasted all that life had to offer and found it wanting, a sobering reminder that without God, even the greatest achievements are meaningless. Solomon's story is one of contrasts, of incredible highs and devastating lows, of divine wisdom and human folly. He built a kingdom that was the envy of the world, yet he also sowed the seeds of its eventual downfall. His life is a reminder that wisdom alone is not enough. It must be paired with obedience and humility before God. Solomon's wealth and achievements could not save him from the consequences of turning away from the Lord, and his story stands as a cautionary tale for all who seek success without regard for the state of their own heart. As we reach this point in Solomon's life, the narrative shifts from a golden age of prosperity to a period marked by impending division and strife. His legacy, both magnificent and tragic, continues to echo through history, offering lessons for us today about the nature of true wisdom, the dangers of compromise, and the enduring faithfulness of God despite human failure. Solomon's story challenges us to consider our own lives, to reflect on the choices we make, and to remember that true greatness is found not in wealth or power, but in a heart fully devoted to God. As the twilight of Solomon's reign began to descend, the kingdom that had once been a beacon of prosperity was beginning to fracture beneath the weight of its own excesses. The seeds of discord had been sown, and the grandeur that had defined Solomon's rule was now overshadowed by the creeping shadows of unrest and discontent. Solomon, whose wisdom had once illuminated the path for his people, found himself struggling to maintain the unity that his father David had fought so hard to establish. This second part of Solomon's story is a sobering reminder of how even the greatest among us can fall, and how the consequences of our choices ripple far beyond our own lifetimes. The first cracks in the foundation of Solomon's kingdom began with the burden of labor and taxation that his grand ambitions had imposed upon the people. The construction of the temple, the palace, the fortifications, and numerous other projects had required a massive workforce. Initially, these projects had been a source of pride, symbols of Israel's strength and God's favor. But as the years passed, the demands grew heavier. Solomon conscripted thousands of his own people into forced labor, and the strain on the common citizens began to take its toll. The once joyful spirit of the nation was replaced with murmurs of discontent, and the people who had once celebrated Solomon's wisdom now began to question his judgment. Jeroboam, a young and capable official in Solomon's administration, was among those who saw firsthand the growing unrest. He was a man of action, a natural leader, and it wasn't long before his ambitions began to align with the frustrations of the people. One day, as Jeroboam was leaving Jerusalem, he was met by the prophet Ahijah, who held a new and startling message from God. Ahijah took hold of the cloak he was wearing, tore it into 12 pieces, and handed 10 of them to Jeroboam. The meaning was clear. God intended to divide the kingdom, and Jeroboam would rule over 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel. This prophecy was not a reflection of Jeroboam's merit alone. It was a divine judgment against Solomon. Despite his wisdom, Solomon had allowed his heart to be turned away from God by his foreign wives and their gods. He had built high places for Chemosh, Molech, and other deities, and the once faithful king had compromised his devotion to the one true God. The God who had appeared to Solomon twice, who had blessed him with wisdom and prosperity, was now declaring that the kingdom would be torn from his lineage, a direct consequence of his disobedience. Solomon, upon hearing of Jeroboam's intentions and the prophecy of Ahijah, sought to kill Jeroboam. But Jeroboam fled to Egypt, finding refuge with Shishak, the pharaoh of Egypt, where he remained until Solomon's death. This was a sign of the shifting allegiances that were taking place. The once strong ties that Solomon had forged through marriage and diplomacy were now unraveling, and Egypt, once a partner, became a place of refuge for his adversaries. As Solomon aged, the once vibrant and visionary king seemed to lose his way. His lavish lifestyle and the demands of his enormous household, the hundreds of wives and concubines, the servants and the officials, placed an increasing strain on the resources of the kingdom. The man who had once asked God for wisdom to rule justly now seemed more concerned with maintaining his wealth and status than with the well-being of his people. The weight of his choices, compounded by years of compromise, began to crush the spirit of the nation. The book of Ecclesiastes, attributed to Solomon in his later years, reflects the melancholy and disillusionment that seemed to pervade his final days. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. These words, penned by a man who had experienced unparalleled wealth, pleasure, and power, reveal the emptiness that comes from pursuing worldly success without a true connection to God. Solomon had tasted all that life had to offer: riches, wisdom, power, and pleasure. But in the end, he found it all to be fleeting, like chasing after the wind. Yet, amidst the despair, there's also a note of hope. Ecclesiastes ends with a powerful reminder: fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. It is as if Solomon, looking back over the years of his life, saw with clarity the true purpose that had eluded him in his pursuit of grandeur. The wisdom that had once been his greatest strength had become clouded by his compromises, but in the end, that the only lasting fulfillment comes from a life lived in obedience to God. Solomon's death marked the end of an era. The kingdom that David had united and Solomon had brought to its peak of prosperity was now on the brink of division. Rehoboam, Solomon's son, ascended to the throne, but he lacked the wisdom and the humility of his father in his early years. When the people came to Rehoboam, asking for relief from the heavy burdens that Solomon had placed upon them, he consulted with the elders who had served his father. They advised him to be a servant to the people, to lighten their load, and in return he would earn their loyalty. But Rehoboam also sought the counsel of his young friends. those who had grown up with him in the palace, who had known only privilege and power. They advised him to show strength, to increase the burdens, and to prove his authority. Rehoboam chose the latter course, telling the people, "My father made your yoke heavy. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions." It was a fatal mistake. The people, already weary and disillusioned, rejected Rehoboam's harshness, and 10 of the 12 tribes broke away, declaring Jeroboam their king. The once unified kingdom was now divided, Israel to the north and Judah to the south. This division was the beginning of a long and painful decline for the people of Israel. The northern kingdom, under Jeroboam, quickly fell into idolatry, as Jeroboam set up golden calves in Bethel and Dan, fearing that if the people continued to go to Jerusalem to worship, their loyalty would shift back to Rehoboam. The southern kingdom of Judah, under Rehoboam, fared little better, as the legacy of Solomon's compromises continued to influence the people. The grandeur of Solomon's temple, the symbol of God's presence among his people, now stood as a reminder of what had been lost: a divided nation, torn apart by pride, ambition, and disobedience. And yet, even in this bleak period of Israel's history, God's faithfulness remained. Despite the division, despite the idolatry and the failures of the kings, God did not abandon his people. The promise he had made to David, that his descendants would sit on the throne, remained intact. From the line of David would come a king who would reunite not only Israel and Judah, but all of humanity, a Messiah who would embody the wisdom, justice, and righteousness that Solomon had only glimpsed. Solomon's story, with all its triumphs and tragedies, serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of a heart fully devoted to God. His wisdom was unmatched, his wealth unparalleled, and his achievements extraordinary. Yet, without steadfast devotion, all of it was ultimately meaningless. The temple he built, though magnificent, could not replace the need for true worship and obedience. The wealth he accumulated, though vast, could not buy peace for his troubled heart. The alliances he formed, though politically shrewd, brought foreign gods into his household and led him away from the one true God. For us today, Solomon's life is a call to examine our own priorities. It is easy to be dazzled by the allure of success, to seek wisdom, wealth, and influence as ends in themselves. But Solomon's story teaches us that without a heart aligned with God's will, all of these pursuits are empty. True fulfillment comes not from what we build or accumulate, but from our relationship with God and our obedience to his commandments. In the New Testament, Jesus spoke of Solomon saying, "Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these." In this simple statement, Jesus reminds us that the beauty and glory of God's creation, the peace that comes from trusting in him, far surpasses the fleeting splendor of human achievement. Solomon's wisdom, wealth, and power were gifts from God, but they were never meant to be ends in themselves. They were meant to point Solomon and the people of Israel back to the source of all true wisdom and blessing, God himself. As we reflect on Solomon's life, we are reminded of the fragility of human greatness. His story is one of potential both realized and lost, of a kingdom that reached unparalleled heights, only to be torn apart by the very flaws that lay within its foundation. It is a story that challenges us to seek more than just wisdom, more than just success. It calls us to seek a heart that is fully devoted to God, a life that is lived not for our own glory, but for his. Solomon's legacy is a complex one. He was a king who built a magnificent temple, who ruled with wisdom that drew the admiration of the world, and who led his people into an era of prosperity. But he was also a man who allowed his heart to be led astray, whose compromises led to the division of the kingdom, and whose later years were marked by disillusionment and regret. His life is a testament to both the heights of human potential and the depths of human frailty. In the end, Solomon's story points us to the need for a greater king, a king who would not falter, who would not compromise, and who would lead his people with perfect wisdom and justice. That king is Jesus Christ, the descendant of David, who came to fulfill the promise that God had made so long ago. Where Solomon failed, Jesus succeeded. Where Solomon's kingdom was divided, Jesus' kingdom is united. Where Solomon's wisdom was clouded by his own desires, Jesus' Wisdom is pure and unchanging. The story of Solomon is not just a story of the past, it is a story that speaks to us today. It is a reminder of the dangers of compromise, the emptiness of worldly pursuits, and the importance of a heart devoted to God. It challenges us to seek true wisdom, to build our lives on a foundation that cannot be shaken, and to remember that the greatest achievements are those that bring us closer to God and reflect His glory. As we conclude this journey through Solomon's life, let us take to heart the lessons that his story offers. Let us remember that true wisdom comes from God, that true success is found in obedience to Him, and that the greatest legacy we can leave is one of faithfulness. Solomon's life, with all its splendor and all its sorrow, is a testament to the truth that without God, even the greatest of kings is nothing. But with God, even the humblest of servants can leave a legacy that endures for eternity. The story of Solomon also teaches us the enduring value of humility. In his early years, Solomon showed humility by asking God for wisdom rather than riches or power. This humility was the key to his early success, as it aligned his will with God's purpose. However, as his reign progressed, the power and wealth he accumulated led him away from that humble beginning. The pursuit of grandeur overshadowed the simple but profound act of seeking God. We, too, must guard against the temptation to let our achievements and successes cloud our dependence on God. Humility keeps us grounded, reminding us that every good thing we have comes from Him. Moreover, Solomon's decline serves as a powerful warning about the subtlety of compromise. His fall did not happen overnight. It was a gradual erosion of his devotion. Each small step away from God's commandments, each concession made for political gain or personal pleasure, contributed to the ultimate fracture of his kingdom. This is a cautionary tale for us in our own lives. Compromise may start small, but left unchecked, it can lead us far from the path of righteousness. We must remain vigilant, consistently aligning our actions and decisions with God's will, even in the seemingly minor details of our lives. Another poignant lesson from Solomon's life is the impact of our choices on future generations. Solomon's decisions did not just affect him, they shaped the fate of an entire nation. The division of Israel and Judah, the subsequent conflicts, and the spiritual decline of the people were direct results of Solomon's actions. It reminds us that our lives are interconnected, and our choices carry weight beyond our own experience. We have a responsibility not only to ourselves, but also to those who come after us, to leave a legacy that draws others closer to God, rather than leading them astray. Finally, despite the tragic aspects of Solomon's life, we are reminded of God's enduring grace. Even though Solomon strayed, God did not completely abandon him or his lineage. The promise made to David remained, ultimately fulfilled in Jesus Christ. This is a message of hope for all of us. No matter how far we may wander, God's grace is available to bring us back. His faithfulness is unwavering, and His plans are not thwarted by human failure. In our own lives, we can find comfort in knowing that God's grace is sufficient, and His love is steadfast, even when we fall short. In reflecting on Solomon's legacy, we are called to pursue a life that is marked by faithfulness, humility, and a steadfast devotion to God. The pursuit of wisdom is noble, but it must be accompanied by a heart that remains true to the one who grants it. The story of Solomon is ultimately a story of God's desire for His people to walk in obedience and love, to seek Him above all else, and to trust in His unfailing wisdom and provision. May we learn from Solomon's triumphs and failures, and may our lives be a testament to the enduring power of God's grace and the importance of a heart fully devoted to Him.